Welcome to the next episode of the CMA panel podcast for the Americas edition. So right now it's a smaller panel, so it's just Brian and myself, but Brian is one of the best in the business when it comes to AI implementations, and I believe he's just had a bit of a career shift. So why don't you go ahead and tell us about that, Brian, while we get going?
Yeah, so I've been working with ServiceNow for probably 12 or 14 years. Recently decided to take a little bit of a semi-retirement, spend a little bit more time with family and a brand new grandson. So got some interesting things ahead of me there. Want to keep my feet in the water with ServiceNow, though.
Of course, yeah. That's honestly kind of my dream retirement plan too, is to kind of work 6 months, do one project in 6 months if that's possible, and then kind of travel the rest. But I got a while to go for that, so a lot to work towards. Anyway, today we're here to talk about some of the best practices and some things to think about when you're talking about AI governance, which is, of course, that framework of policies and those ethical guidelines that are designed to direct your development and use of AI. The target outcomes that you're looking for are ensured safety, fairness, and transparency, and it also will address certain risks like bias and privacy concerns so that your company is able to implement beneficial AI in a responsible manner. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's
no. Okay. So we're just going to kind of cover some stuff at the high end piece and at the high level, and then we'll have you expand a bit if you can, Brian, on it. So I understand that one of the first pieces that we're looking for here, or one of the first principles, is empathy. So involving understanding those social impacts and anticipating its effects across key parties in different demographics. So what does empathy in AI governance mean to you?
That's one that I'm not sure I've seen really well established. I think the intent there is the fairness, certainly, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think from what I've seen in organizations, governance is in this area is still pretty immature. Mm-hmm. So, I think that's probably more of an aspirational area in many respects.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's fair. And just a reminder to those that have joined us. Oh, good afternoon, Azim. Feel free to post any questions in the chat, and we will do our best to answer them. I'll moderate the chat for you, Brian, so don't worry about that. Okay. So after we look at the empathy principle, the next one that we'd like to discuss is the bias control. That has us managing a rigorous analysis of the training data and the algorithms, and that'll help remove biases that could lead to unfair outcomes. So how do you kind of see some of the high-level outcomes and deliverables for bias control?
Well, I think some of that is looking at, what is the corpus of data that you're training the AI on? So, the old adage of garbage in, garbage out very much still applies. Mm-hmm. The complication with AI sometimes is, and I know this is one of the other ones you're probably going to jump to, is the transparency. That's not always very easy to see how AI got to its result. So you're trying to make sure you've got good data in the first place that's running analysis on is certainly important. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, the training model data is kind of what you're getting at. Yeah, and hey, Neela, just wanted to say hey, thanks for joining us as well. Okay, so the other piece, the third one, is the transparency piece, where we require openness about how these AI algorithms operate, including their data sources and decision-making logic. So how do you start to look at transparency and teaching your clients about it?
I think one area there is in looking at some of the AI prompting skills. So certainly as you're prompting AI and you're doing tests on the results that you're getting out of AI, one of the things you can do to help establish that transparency is, ask it to explain how it got to its results as you're doing testing. So you can use that as, okay, what were the steps that it took to get here? How does that impact what the end result was? How can I change my prompt, or look at the data that's being used to make sure that we are getting the results that are fair and accurate and unbiased.
So that's a great point, that kind of causes me to go into a bit of a different direction here. So, when we're talking transparency, you're actually able to leverage AI to show you how it got there, which means you're interacting with the very tool you're testing or the very tool that you're practicing with, so that you can then have it teach you how to use it. So it gets a little,
Which
cyclical
came
there.
first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Well, I mean, the egg came first on that one, but, but yes. Yeah. Okay. So the next one, the last one out of these four principles is accountability. And that's where we ensure that organizations are taking responsibility for the social, legal, and operational impacts of their AI systems. And this one's a large one that spreads further than just ServiceNow. And I know ServiceNow's AI engine is huge, but it may not be the only AI shop or the AI tool within an organization. I know many clients that are using ServiceNow AI and Copilot. So you need to have a framework here that not only covers both tools at the enterprise level, but also the individual tools because they may have different use cases. For example, Copilot may summarize your meetings, and ServiceNow may summarize a ton of your incidents to roll them all up into a problem. So having those kinds of things. How do you see accountability fitting into some of these implementations?
Well, and I think you hit on one of the key points there, that governance really needs to be approached holistically from the organization level, not just a ServiceNow governance. That you need to have, governance, I think, needs to evolve a little bit more from, everything runs through the AI officer because that
Mm-hmm.
becomes a bottleneck, right?
Yep.
To being more of, what are some of our organization wide standards? Are we going to, you know, are we going to allow, agentic AI where we don't have a human in the loop? Or
Mm-hmm.
if we do, what are the circumstances that we do allow that in, so that it's, that's not a ServiceNow question. That's an organization question. And
Right.
those policies and that governance should be broader than ServiceNow. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, we do have a question. So you ready?
Sure.
All right. So, as AI systems increasingly influence high stakes decision making, how can governance frameworks evolve beyond compliance checklists to embed proactive ethical reasoning, algorithmic transparency, and dynamic risk management into the design and deployment lifecycle, particularly in contexts where regulatory guidance is still emerging or ambiguous? So hold on. That was,
That was a mouthful. Yeah.
let's break that down. So that's the first step. Break it down into as small a chunk as you can. So, first off, you would need to establish what is a high stakes decision making framework. And then let me break that one down for you. So, how would governance frameworks evolve beyond compliance checklists so that the outcome is driven, that algorithmic transparency is built into the design and deployment lifecycle? How would you do that?
Hmm.
Any idea? I mean, I at first I would try to bring in the AI architect into as many, emerging requirement gathering meetings and solutioning meetings to get their input as early as possible. And that would
Agreed.
probably force you to have an AI architect as well. That would be not just tied to one tool, but kind of like an AI enterprise architect. Do you see that role kind of emerging in more customers these days, Brian?
I think that's where we need to go. Yeah. I think where what I've seen has been, as again, looking to probably a little more immature governance than maybe as desirable as, this is definitely still an evolving area. But
Mm-hmm.
I think the governance that I've seen tends to be more of, hey, this is a gatekeeper. All use cases for AI run through the AI officer. They decide
Mm-hmm.
whether or not it's something that we want to tackle or not, right?
Right.
And it needs to be more of, what are the risk factors that we're going to consider? What are the, the low risk, high value use cases that we want to
Mm-hmm.
prioritize? How do the different AI frameworks and different tools work together?
Right.
Yeah. So again, going back to that holistic approach.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And I think you need to start with compliance checklists at a bare minimum. So think of it as like the foundation: crawl, walk, run, fly. approach, even at this stage. So, the foundation would be that checklist. Crawling would be then operationalizing it and socializing within your organization at the design level of your implementation, and then moving it along throughout the rest of the release life cycle as well to ensure that it is thought of at every step of the way, including post deployment, which would then put you into the continual service improvement
Mhm.
and the operational maintenance side of things. Uh, how do you find that AI governance works within those regulatory guidance things that are still emerging or ambiguous? So if I'm like working in a financial institution and I don't really have clear guidance from my regulator on what I should do.
Yeah, I think it's, as the fog and confusion, you know, kind of dissipates and this becomes more, mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
We have maybe a better view of, what those regulations are going to be and how we need to comply with it. It's, as you said, earlier, it's definitely a continuous improvement.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You can also look towards other industries that have even stricter regulations than yourself. So, if you're not government, what's the government doing? And try and get a copy of those regulations and checklists as a starting point. And typically you'll know, okay, well, I may not be as regulated as the government in terms of data sensitivity or data transmission, etc. So, but I can use that as a step. And if I meet that guideline today, I can still always kind of roll it back if it's too heavy for when the regulations are fully defined and socialized within your industry. Okay.
And looking at it from a risk standpoint. So if you've got
Yes.
something where, it's a particular use case affects your customer or affects, high risk areas of the business, those need to be approached differently than, something that is maybe summarizing a case or,
Right.
right.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Azim, for that question. That was a great one. Sorry that we had to break it down, but I thought that would kind of help us get through the several questions you kind of had in there. But you just had mentioned risk, Brian, which takes us to some of the key elements as to why AI governance is important. So, effectively managing risk would probably be one of the top ones.
Agreed. Yeah.
So how do you see AI governance kicking in to help you manage that risk?
So I think if, as you're assessing risk, you can have different policies, you use some of the risk framework within ServiceNow, for example, to have different policies and different compliance checklists. So again, as
Mhm.
compliance checklist is maybe the immature basic level, but it's
Yeah.
ensuring that you've at least got some of those things in place if it's particular more of a risky use case.
Are you applying other risk management frameworks to your AI governance? I'll give you an example. Like, let's say there's a data flow where the data is sent from one system to another and kind of comes around. How it's transmitted, is that through a secure channel? Is that not? Is that type of stuff coming in, the types of data you're transmitting and how it's transmitted? Are
I
you
think it
looking at that?
should be. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
don't. Again, some of the governance that I've seen is not necessarily a good, poster child of what
Mm-hmm.
should be done. But yeah, I think the types of data that you're working with has got to be one of the main criteria that you're using in assessing risk. Yeah,
Right. Okay.
absolutely.
When we're talking about establishing compliance and accountability, we know that there's a European Parliament Artificial Intelligence Act, which is called the AI Act, that's now in place. But many of, as Ema said, many organizations and governments have yet to publish anything along that list. So, what would you say is a good place to start if I have no governance?
So I think look at what's out there. So as it may not directly apply to you if you're you know for example, you're not dealing with the EU. Those regulations may not apply, but certainly you can assess them and cherry pick where something is
Mm-hmm.
applicable as you're trying to work through what should our framework be, and as
Right.
the regulations in whatever industry you are evolve. Um,
Yeah.
if it, in some ways, obviously dating myself a little bit here, but this is in some ways very similar to the dawn of the internet age, right? That you know it it's a new technology that everybody is jumping on. Sooner or later, though, it becomes a foundational enabling technology that everything uses, right?
Right.
So when you buy something today, you no longer ask, is it internet enabled, right? It's just an
It
assumption
is.
that it is.
Yeah.
And as some of those frameworks and privacy concerns, evolved over the last, number of years as the internet evolved, you're going to see the same thing with AI too, that
Mhm.
it's going to evolve and become more clear and become more standard. Yeah.
And I think that it's important to have, MVF or minimum viable frameworks here to to be better than the nothing governance model. So, like you said, if you go through and
Not the
check what's
Wild
out
West.
there, yeah, you
Yeah.
check what's out there, cherry pick certain things and acknowledge this isn't going to be that picture perfect final product, but if I've got 8 items on my checklist and that is 8 more than I had yesterday, you're better. You're getting better. And at least you're building that framework and building that governance model as opposed to waiting to build it all out, which could take a year or two, especially if regulations and laws need to be passed. You don't want to have to wait that long. So you can build that minimum viable framework and then build upon it as you continually grow and learn about the tool. Don't be hesitant to make a change to your framework if new information has come to light or a new regulation has come into effect or is even being proposed.
And approach it from that continuous improvement standpoint. So,
Yes.
as you ideally start with high value, low risk use
Hmm.
cases, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to learn things, but if you learn them in those low risk use cases, your your framework is going to evolve and is going to be able to better address as you slowly ratchet up the risk to others. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Okay, so addressing ethical and moral considerations. So, like ideas that journey unexpectedly far. They can AI systems can disseminate concepts widely, and when these concepts foster discrimination or perpetrate prejudice and stereotypes, it can lead to significant harm. How do you see some of these implementations take into consideration ethical and moral considerations?
I really have not seen that strongly addressed. I think that's definitely aspirational.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that you want to make sure is happening, but maybe most organizations aren't quite sure how to do that yet, right?
Okay.
So that is something I think is going to continue to evolve. Yeah.
Okay. How do you build more trust with your AI system or
I'm
your
sorry,
AI
what?
implement? How do you build more trust or even maintain the amount of trust you've already earned when you're doing your AI deployment, especially within ServiceNow?
Yeah, I think trying to test for as you're developing and getting ready to deploy, as you're doing prototypes, et cetera, trying to test for things that try to break it, right? So
Hmm.
try to test for things that are potentially showing bias. Ask questions. Look for results that potentially show that bias or those unethical results.
Okay. Okay, and then of course we've already discussed how we want to ensure transparency, but let's talk a bit about how we would promote innovation within AI, because it can become dangerous, especially with all the data sensitivity concerns. How would you establish safeguards that allow an organization to explore new ServiceNow AI applications with confidence?
I think the concept of using some of the out of the box skills are generally some pretty low risk ones, right?
Hmm.
So those are time savings. Things the basic use cases are things like case summarization or knowledge generation, things
Hmm.
like that help an agent be more effective, but aren't necessarily a very high risk one. Um, Certainly, as you're, I think the organization as a whole should be looking at things from an AI first perspective.
Right.
Let's you know, not necessarily mandate that everything has to be done with AI, but let's, you know, look at things from the perspective of, can we use AI in a certain area? Let's try to make that our first go-to.
Right.
Yeah.
That actually, I want to double click on that a bit. Is I see a lot of organizations that get on an AI train like this, and they're going to use it for anything and everything. We're going to have an AI bot run our board meetings and all that kind of stuff. How do you identify some of those initial use cases for AI? I mean, you hit on case summarization and record summarization. That's now Assist. Can you expand a bit more on agentic AI and some of those initial low hanging fruit use cases? And we'll break it down a little bit by product. So let's start with ITSM.
Yeah, I think that's an area where there's room for developing new use cases that are maybe less out of the box. They're a little bit more custom for a particular area. But I'm a fan for the keep the human in the loop
Mm-hmm.
approach on things. That if they're particularly as you know some of these technologies are fairly new and fairly immature, and as some of the regulations and some of the gotchas aren't quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a human sanity checking, one of those things, have the agentic AI do the legwork and come up with here's what we recommend, but have somebody have a human agent review that and click approve or whatever is appropriate
Right.
before they actually kick off that result.
Okay, so that's an interesting use case right there, and I think it applies to a lot of different product streams and departments within an enterprise. So essentially, you would have something come in to ServiceNow, and agentic AI would summarize it in a way that a quick decision point, like even break it down to a simple yes/no question, that would then be sent to an approver or a person who would say, yes, I agree. And then would you also say that AI then would be used to do the implementation itself where possible?
I think it depends on the scenario that we're talking about, right? But
Hmm.
I think certainly a good area for some productivity improvement and leveraging the agentic AI capabilities is in the customer service area.
Okay.
So IT is very similar, but your
Yep.
customer service has the ability to get faster service to your customers, generate results and get resolution quicker, and that can be a financial payback,
Hmm.
from the customer end of things, whereas IT is maybe that's more internal, it's more employee satisfaction and things, maybe doesn't have that
Right.
direct financial payback. But if you've got, and I think you've probably seen in the industry news, there have been cases where people just kind of turned on agentic AI to deal with their customers, and you get some real pushback of hey, this was a lousy results. It told me
Yep.
something that I ended up being a lost customer at that point, right? So
That's
I
fair.
think that's an area where you have the agentic AI agent do that legwork to begin with, come up with, okay, based on similar cases that we've seen, here's what we suggest as a resolution, and the human agent just needs to take a little bit of time to quickly review that, sanity check it, say, does this
Right.
make sense? Is it going to end up losing us a customer rather than gaining their loyalty, and then clicking yes to have it kick off. So
Okay. Yeah, that takes me kind of back to my service desk days or when I worked on the help desk. So yes, I did only take internal calls on the help desk, but I could see how having that initial search, all that research happen in the back end while I'm perhaps capturing details or something like that if I've got my customer service hat on. And then it could present me three or four options to say, do any of these we think, with 80% confidence, this one's the right answer, 75 for that. And then I could review those and send them to the customer. It would take that whole manual research and me having to learn how to
yeah,
navigate a knowledge base, et cetera, effectively. I think that would definitely cut down a lot of that response time. And then I would,
absolutely.
you'd have all these other downstream impacts. So if I can reduce my call time by 25%, then that means I have a potential, if there's constantly calls in the queue, to have an increase in calls answered. I would also increase my chances of first time resolution, which would drive up customer satisfaction and things along that. I do like how you kind of called out that sometimes just the flipping the switch and handing it off to AI is too jarring for many customer bases. How do you recommend doing a smoother transition? So if that's my end goal, I want customers to come in and chat with an intelligent AI chatbot and be able to target 80% first call resolution via the chat through the chatbot, and then the rest 20% are picked up by humans. What kind of implementation path would you recommend to get there?
Yeah, so you could certainly have some things that are, again, going back to the risk assessment.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got scenarios that make sense from a low risk perspective, that you can test and say, okay, this is something that provides good results to my customer, external customer or internal customer. Have those things be what you start with, rather than something that potentially is, involving monetary impact to that customer, or could have a higher likelihood of customer dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Stay away from those to begin with.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Would you approve of a plan of like saying, if you give AI a chance and you find a solution that works for you, you get 5% off on your next order, something like that?
Yeah.
Some sort of cost savings thing. Because I think a huge part that people need to make sure they manage is that human side of it. Someone at the end of the day will be interacting with this AI. So I'm coming in and I'm a customer. I have a problem. What is that first AI layer that I'm interacting with? And what is that experience like? And how do I come back and leave with a positive experience? Is going to be a critical aspect of it. The customer does at the end does not care how you resolve the issue, just
Right.
so long as you listen to them, you understand the problem correctly, and then you resolve it in what they consider to be a timely manner, and we can debate what the timely manner timeline looks like, because sometimes it's 10 seconds, other times they're happy with a month.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the crawl, walk, run that we talked about earlier, those are some good areas where you can set some foundational things in place. Make sure you've got some good knowledge that your AI chatbot can access and suggest results from. Make sure you've got some good case or incident data that the same thing that can be used to look for other solutions. So those are some good blocking and tackling things that if you establish some of those, you can more easily address some of those lower risk use cases.
Right. Okay. Let's kind of head back into some of the foundational data pieces. So this is such an important part. Kind of or you'd use the previous common expression of garbage in, garbage out, and if you have foundational data that is poor model training data, then the model can only be as smart as
Mm-hmm.
what you've trained it on, right? So this is the difference between going out and doing your own independent research on YouTube compared to taking an accredited, industry respected full 4-year course. So how do you get some of your clients to manage and clean that foundational data to pave the way for a smooth AI training data model to be implemented?
I would say it's a struggle, right? That's
Yeah.
an area that I think many organizations can definitely use improvement on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the situation that leaps to mind is a particular customer. Their customer service agents were really putting a lot of, I hate to say useless, but essentially useless information into the case resolution notes that they
Mm-hmm.
were basically just trying to do more of a CYA type of here's a bunch of different data so nobody can come back and say I didn't do these things, but wasn't
Right.
really useful for the resolution. So
Hmm.
it makes it very difficult then to say, okay, here's, good, clean data that, the AI can make use of.
Right.
So, things like, making sure you've got current and relevant knowledge, making sure that you've got, good policies and practices around, what's going into your incidents or cases, that sort of thing,
Right.
are some good, basic activities that you can do to begin with.
And I really think that starts with a lot of leadership.
Mhm.
And when I say leadership, I'm talking CTO or above. So you touched on something that I remember doing, just putting in whatever I could for a resolution note so that I didn't get asked about it later. What that generated was low value resolution notes that were essentially adding nothing when it came to reporting. It didn't help us drive any decisions later on. This resolution note never led to an article, yeah, a knowledge article. It never led to enhanced training. It never led to anything else in the organization that would help prevent that call from coming in tomorrow. And I
Agreed.
think until leadership comes in and says, we're not going to punish or look at and raise an eyebrow if you put in something like a resolution note that maybe adds no value. I would want the leadership to communicate to the team that we have to put in the right data, even if it's bad data to start, so that I can really see what the true lay of the land is and then improve it. It's so hard to improve foundational data that has masking on it, that has all this other, band-aids all over the place. Uh, do you ever look to like single data sources to kind of groom the data outside of ServiceNow, or are you trying to manage the data within ServiceNow to improve it and then go from there?
Well, certainly you've got some areas that, from speaking of foundation data, some things that are single sources of truth for, some of that core organizational data. Um, but the from a case or incident resolution perspective, it's, I think, harder to have something outside of ServiceNow that can be relevant there. Yeah.
Right. Fair enough. Okay, so let's kind of look at some of the essential steps in generating an AI governance plan and kind of talk through those. So the first one that we would have to establish is defining the purpose and the scope of the plan. So what are some key factors that you would look to have considered, and what are some outcomes you want to have out of that part? So defining that purpose and scope.
I think purpose and scope, you need to have at a high enough level in the organizational leadership some direction there that's establishing this is why we're taking an AI first approach to things, and we're looking for things that will result in good customer experience, good employee experience, ethical and fair results from our AI, trying to establish some of those you know, areas as the purpose and scope. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and we'd also probably want to look at specific areas of that AI technology would cover, specific applications. Maybe start identifying some systems, algorithms, and the data sources that'll fall within the scope of this, to make sure that we're not pulling something in that is already covered under another governance plan. But if we are, making sure that we're working in concert with that. So, have you gone through an AI risk assessment? Like, have you conducted one with a
I
customer?
have not now.
Okay, because that's the second one.
Yeah.
So, this is one of the when you're on the bleeding edge, or you're on the edge of technology, you can sometimes cut yourself and bleed a bit. So, having not gone through a conducted risk assessment for AI, yes, I have not either. So, it is certainly quite new. So, again, the same thing kind of applies here. If you haven't done it, come up with a simple one and then build upon it, because a simple one is better than not doing it.
Not having anything at all.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. So don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to build the beautiful dream car at the end. Like, if you need to just go get groceries today, any car will do. Jump on the bus. It still gets you there and gets you home. And it would be better than just walking over there. Have you established any set of ethical guidelines or principles?
I have not. No.
Okay, so same thing. Okay, so if we'd want to develop a set of those, again, start very small, get something that people can build upon and understand, and then that you can build out the broader context of that later. They'll guide that deployment, development, and the usage of it, and they'll take into consideration those four main points: fairness, transparency, accountability, privacy, etc.
Yeah, I think even as you mentioned, some basic things that you can do to start with is, just having that be, a policy that those have got to be things that you test for as you're developing your
Mm-hmm.
AI solutions. That you try to break it against those different areas and try to see if it is, giving you something that might not be an ethical response.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things I see missed often is cloning considerations. So take a look at how any of your implementations, whether AI based or not, anything that you're developing, how does that impact your clone process? And because we want to be able to clone at any moment, and we want to be able to clone any instance except production. So having a mature cloning process will speed up so many other outcomes that you need, and AI implementations need to take that into consideration.
Yeah, and the wrinkle there from an AI perspective is, if you've got an organization that says we cannot have any production data in our non-production instances, that makes it very challenging from a
Mm-hmm.
development and testing standpoint for AI, right?
That's right.
Because
Yes.
you're basically creating, artificial data in your non-production instances and trying to see what the AI does to that, and then turning it loose in production against completely different data,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, we're going to break out from a bit because we have a question from Ethan Davies. Hey, Ethan, thanks for joining us. So, Ethan asks, does AI require an increased level of technical and foundational literacy at management and leadership levels that was not previously required? That's a two-parter question, so
Yeah.
I'll hit you with the first one. I mean, you
I,
chuckled, so.
yeah, absolutely, right. So I think where you have leadership that's just saying AI is a buzzword, everything has got to be AI. Why aren't we doing more with AI? And without leadership having a, a good foundational understanding of what that is, and what use cases are that make sense. When it's just a buzzword, you're not going to get good follow through and good direction from your leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the buzzwords are for the golf course. So use them there, and use those golf course buzzwords to get yourself that meeting for sure. But then when you're in the meeting doing the actual workshop and discussing things, then that's when some of the real work comes out so that you can truly educate to the audience. So Ethan also asks, how do you recommend that leaders, managers, and employees in general improve their understanding and literacy using AI? So this is one of the common mistakes that I have done many, many times myself, and probably still do a bit. But I need to really make sure that I'm covering the material with the audience in mind. So I can't just show up and do a workshop or a kickoff presentation with leadership and dive super technical, because that's not their role. They want to know capabilities, they want to know outcomes, and they want to know cost and timelines and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to get into the weeds of an algorithm. That's for a different conversation with a different audience. So I've seen some people go in and they use the same deck for everybody. So here's the C-suite. They present it to them, and then they go and present it to the middle layer manager, the directors, the process owners, and then the actual people implementing or using it. It gets the same presentation, and they do this big kickoff, and one group out of those three is engaged and super into it, and the other two don't care at all because it's not written to them as that audience. So making sure that you break it down and have separate content for specific audience types that cater to their needs, wants, is critical to the success of their comprehension, and very important for their adoption to using it. Well, how do you say that leaders, managers get on board with AI so that they get more understanding out of it?
Yeah, I think from an individual standpoint, there's got to be a commitment to ongoing learning, right? So if you're an IT leader, you've got to understand that things don't stay the same. There's a rapid pace of change, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
stay on top of the technology and not just stick at the buzzword level, right? I
Right.
think that's from an individual approach. That's one way of addressing it. I think as a leader, you can also encourage and support the people in the organization to get more understanding. So go through different learning courses. Get a better level of experience, whatever is appropriate to your level. But
Right.
as a leader, I can say, hey, this is important to us. That we're doing an AI first approach to things. Part of that means you do prompt engineering learning. You do basic fundamentals of what is AI, what are these things, and you do some tool specific learning, right?
Yeah.
So as down at the employee level, you've got those different resources available to you.
That's true. Yeah, and those you kind of triggered me to think that at that C-suite level, we are educating and recommending. So shout out to Lucy because every time I say educate and recommend, I think of you from my CMA cohort, and I'm sure you remember that going through your own CMA cohort is how can I educate and recommend and be as concise as possible. So hey Lucy, thanks for that. That's where we're talking to the leadership level. We're educating and recommending, conveying that information at a high level, providing a timeline and the value achieved out of it. But then when we get down into here's the adoption piece at the middle management, that's where we are educating and teaching them a bit so that they can then become a resource to those that are using it. And then the final one is, educate and train, and that's the hands on. Here's how you use it. You're not going to train your CEO or CTO to become a prompt engineer, but you will train your help desk people or your customer service agents to be prompt engineers. And the better they are at it, the more they gain out of it. So that investment within the people will help drive that better outcome as the team overall, which then rolls up. The more
Right.
teams that do it, then the better the organization, then the happier the C suite is. So, Ethan, hope that answered it. If not, post another question or follow up. But was there anything else you wanted to talk about relating on that before we move on to the next piece?
I think that hit the main points.
Okay,
Yeah.
so when you've implemented these AI governance programs, Brian, what key parties and like key personas are you working with?
Again, some of the governance that I've worked with in organizations has maybe not been best models, but I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to have the different data owners involved. You need to have people at a enterprise architect level, at a enterprise risk level. You know, those are all key stakeholders
Mm-hmm.
in the governance that needs to go in place for AI. Yeah.
Okay. Do you work closely with any people in the legal side of things at the organization
I
as
have not.
well? No? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. After we've worked with those key parties, though, across the organization, getting them all involved and on board and in concert with each other, and I've kind of have been using some of this lately. Like you may not get everything you want, and you might not be totally happy with all the decisions made, but just know that as an enterprise, as the organization makes these decisions, what's best for the enterprise may not necessarily be what's optimal for you. But when we look at the optimization of the whole thing, we want you to align to the tool, the processes this way, and here's what you get out of it as a whole. And then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, well, I understand that. I'm willing to take on perhaps a little bit more of a process on my side or additional work I didn't do before to maybe be on this AI governance board so that the organization can then reap those benefits later. If we're looking at defining policies and procedures, have you gone through any of those?
Not personally, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
So even if it's capable of training the ethical guidelines and principles into those concrete policies is super important. We need to document these policies and procedures so that they can cover things like our data acquisitions, the model development and validation. That's a key one. How do we determine what is successful? right? And I really liked what you said, because you taught me something today, was that you can ask AI how it got there. So essentially, you can, the equivalent of show me the work. I used to grade
Yeah.
11 math, Miss Baird. We used to always disagree because I'm like, here's the answer. And she's like, I don't know how you got there. And I'm like, well, all I had was a calculator. We didn't have phones back then. So, like, so I didn't, why do I have to write it all out when I got right there? She's like, that's not the point. Anyway, so makes me think of that.
Yeah.
So having that understanding of how it got there is critical, so that you can make sure that it was showing the work and getting there correctly and making the right decision all the way. Otherwise, you might have to go in and fix something in the middle. Just because AI got there correctly this time doesn't mean it will next time or every time. The algorithm decision making is another piece. The user content, data privacy and security is always something that we need to be aware of. Loop in your security teams, your data privacy officer if you're under GDPR regulations in the European Union, and make sure that these clearly defined policies and procedures are used consistently. That was another thing that I've seen a lot of. People come up with beautiful policies and procedures, and then they're stored somewhere on a SharePoint. They're put into a knowledge base, and then you can go and see the view count, and it's like 6. It's like the view counts of the podcast here, so 6 or 7. It's like, you guys should be seeing this every day. This should be used once a week by every agent. So, can you run through any of the mechanisms for accountability and transparency that you've kind of established?
Maybe one area that you can leverage those policies that we talked about for accountability is that you can use that as one of the input sources for the AI as well. Mm-hmm. So you can, looking at, again, better together from the ServiceNow perspective, if you have those policies established as ServiceNow policies within the IRM part of ServiceNow, not just on some vague SharePoint or somewhere else that people can't really access them, you can provide that policy as context to an AI prompt saying, make sure we're following these policies as well.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So given that AI is always evolving, how are you monitoring your performance and impact of an AI implementation?
So I think, if you look at the different KPIs that are available in ServiceNow for monitoring AI, you can see some of the usage and health in those areas. I think if you've got some of those, a good testing framework, you want to continue to test to make sure you're getting the same results that you're expecting. Those are a couple areas that you can use.
How do you kind of manage that testing process then?
I think, as again, as we talked about the policies, if you can say part of your policy, these are things that we want to test for, mm-hmm. And make sure that you're doing that as part of the implementation of anything AI.
Okay. And of course, we always want to make sure that we're also adhering to our governance plan. So that's another measurement that's important in our evaluate and improve side of things. So if you were, I'll give you all the power for both sides. You are the CEO of the client that has purchased ServiceNow and the CEO of the company that's implementing it. So let's just say ServiceNow Expert Services. You've come in, replaced Bill McDermott, and you're the CEO of the client. What are some of the key metrics that you're going to want to see delivered at the end of this AI project?
Well, I think, going to the value of what you're trying to get out of here, you want to look at metrics of things like where were we able to help the customer out faster, how many times were we able to address their issue without having to go to a live agent. Some of those metrics would be important things to look at from a value perspective, that we're getting some measurable business value out of these things.
Right. Nice. Okay. And of course, we're not coming for your job, Bill. Don't worry. Don't worry on that one. So one of the things that I kind of heard at one of the last CMA kickoff meetings was from Dave Wright, and he was saying that the business case for AI is not really centered around people reduction. And he kind of gave the example of, let's say you have a team of 16 and you can save each of them a half hour a day. That'll turn into 8 hours a day. Some people think, okay, that's great. I can lay off one person and reduce my headcount and that operational spend. Whereas those people that are, or those organizations that are most successful with implementing AI, use that extra 30 minutes more effectively. So the business case isn't how much time savings and therefore budget reduction can AI save me. It is how much time savings can I receive from this? And then what would I do with that? So the
Where do
question
we have
isn't,
more room
yeah,
for providing innovation? Or yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So one of the big ones is like, imagine there was no backlog. Imagine you could dedicate a half hour every day to backlog grooming. If I'm a developer or a BA, like grooming that backlog. Or imagine there was, all of these old follow-ups if I'm a customer service agent that kind of sit there that are, priority 4 or 5 and just never are gotten to because, there's just no time or there's higher priority stuff to work on. If I save that time and then I'm able to clean that up, there are so many cascading impacts. I mean, just imagine you were all caught up on your email every day. What would that feel like? I think that would feel pretty incredible, and I think that would inspire people to do even more work and kind of work better for the organization and your customers as a whole. So that one really struck a chord with me in that the business case and the thought process around it should not be AI to replace people, but AI
agreed.
to help people save time to focus on something else. And it doesn't always have to be like, oh, I'm going to focus on the most important things. Like I said, cleaning that backlog, having time to be up on email, all of those other things where we've lost 2 calendar days because someone says I'm swamped and I didn't get a chance to your email. Imagine the cost savings to the organization on that type of a thing. You may not be able to measure it right up front, but it would have a visible impact to the organization as a whole.
Agreed.
Okay. So, did you run into any of these like high end pitfalls that you could kind of cover at a very high level during your AI implementations?
Um,
What would you recommend people start with?
I would definitely start with, there's some low hanging fruit with some of the out of the box ServiceNow skills that, there really is not a heavy lift to turning some of those things on and making use of them. Um, you know, Turning on some of the things like the creator skills where it can help you generate code, as your first step. So it's time savings. You still want to look over it and make sure that it's fit for what you're trying to accomplish. So, but it can certainly be a time savings. So turn on those different things that are some of those out of the box skills are I think, a great place to start.
Great place to start. Okay. We got one question, and then I've got one more after that as well to follow up on that. So, Ethan also asks, when you are working with a ServiceNow customer to establish a notion of AI governance, do you recommend a separate AI governance board, or do you see customers merge AI governance into general platform governance?
I think overall the focus on governance should be more holistic to the organization. It should be things about how are we approaching AI as a whole as the organization, not how are we doing it for ServiceNow. That ServiceNow should be, a stakeholder certainly, but these same issues need to get addressed regardless of what tool is being done, and it needs to be, the business first approach. How are we approaching it as a business, and that informs what we do at the platform level. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely, especially because there could be multiple tools in use
Yeah.
here. I kind of recommend for the larger organizations, you have that AI governance board and your ServiceNow platform admin and your ServiceNow architects sit on that board, but they're members. They're not so heavy on the contributing side of it because they're consuming usually AI and asking for permission and technical guidance. Whereas on your ServiceNow governance board, the AI architect or the enterprise AI architect would be contributing more and setting the tone in that ServiceNow layer, saying, here's the unified AI model that we're trying to use across the organization. Here are some of our guiding principles, our use cases, and hoping that ServiceNow can become something that adheres to it so that it's working in concert and working in the same vein as the co-pilots and the other AI tools out of
Absolutely.
the service. Ethan, I hope that answered it. So if not, feel free to reply again, and we'll address it if there's still time. Okay, so I guess one of the last questions that I wanted to touch on is your thoughts on what you would do differently if you could go back in time. So we all do the lessons learned at the end of the project, and everybody gets the handshakes and all that fun stuff. And I really try to take those to heart and implement them moving forward, because the only thing I hate more than rework is rework I did in the last project. So so what are some things that you try to do uh, what would you do if you could go back in time and kind of redo that last project? What would you do a little differently?
I think the leadership commitment to, hey, this is going to be an AI first organization. Here are some of the resources that are available to you as whoever you are in the organization to get better informed about how AI operates, to get better informed about at the ServiceNow level how AI operates, and make use of some of those low hanging fruits. Just let's turn on things, particularly in in the non-production environments. Let's get some of the basics out there and get some of the benefits from more of those out of the box skills.
Yeah, and then you're actually turning something on earlier, therefore you're starting the
Getting value
value
from it.
meter. Yeah, exactly. And then building upon it, right? Everybody likes to build the end state and then do the big bang release. Sometimes that makes sense, but if you can, turn it on, get it in prod, see what people are doing, how they're using it, and then build from there, so that your build improvements are data driven and not just you assuming or guessing how people are going to use it. And you'll be
Right.
surprised at some of the uses that come out of it. Oh, I never thought someone would ask AI to do this for it. Maybe we should invest a little more time and energy there, because that would save 5 teams of 30 people each a ton of time.
Yeah.
Okay, Brian, any closing words? I want to just say thank you so much for making some time for the podcast today and for joining us to talk about AI governance. Governance is one of my favorite things to discuss, so I hope that came through, because I do love it. But
Absolutely
any
did.
parting words, any words of wisdom, anything you'd like to share?
I think just appreciation to you and the audience. I
Mm-hmm.
think it's an area that there's lots that's going to be changing yet. There's quite a fast pace of change. There's lots of capabilities. There's evolving standards, evolving compliance frameworks, et cetera. So lots to stay on top of. So
Definitely. Definitely. Okay, well, just wanted to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time on a Friday, and hope that you all have a lovely weekend. We will be in touch soon. Thanks again to my wonderful guest, Brian.
thank you.
All right.